Hello, everyone, and welcome back to America's Wilderness Years with me, Isaac Bly, and Lucas Stark.
We've got a lot to talk about today. Not just Elon and Donald having a falling out, but also developments in the Big Beautiful Bill and its way through the legislature. Abrigo Garcia is back in the US. The Supreme Court is letting Doge off its leash. And we're also going to be looking at the impact of the tariffs on our economy.
All right, why don't we start with the big headline news? Let's start with the breakup between Trump and Elon Musk.
Yes, it feels like it's something out of a celebrity gossip magazine, but it's actually a major event in our political history now. Uh, Elon Musk and Donald Trump exchanged quite a few insults over their respective social media platforms. And the spat started on Thursday because Musk was calling for senators to kill the big, beautiful bill. He called it a disgusting abomination and all that. And they just said all these nasty things about each other, which I don't want to get into because it's mostly already out there. Everybody knows what they've been slinging. But on Friday, Musk then tried to de-escalate this social media conflict and wanted to reach out and meet with Trump to reconcile. But Trump doesn't seem super interested in that actually, and says that he just wants to move on, that Elon's lost his mind. He doesn't want to talk with him. And I think the reason why this is happening is because Musk genuinely does feel a little betrayed here. He saw that Trump was building sort of an oligarchy in his administration, and he wanted to be a part of it. Musk wanted in on Trump's inner circle. He wanted to be a part of this cabinet that's going to change the way the country works, but he never really fit in with the others. He is much more ideological than them, I think, as you had said before in a previous episode, Isaac. And he just made too many enemies, so they discarded him. They're nudging him out quietly while making it look like they were still in okay relations, but now Elon had a tantrum, so I guess that's out the window now. But Musk really should have seen this coming, I think. He backed a man just as self-centered and ambitious as he is, and now he's surprised that the man is firing him for not towing the line.
Yeah, one wonders because Elon Musk is a very, many ways, socially awkward person. Like, you generally know people don't hand out their sperm to other people, like, ever, no matter how rich they are. And so I think it's true he's more ideological. I don't think he had the same level of ego as Trump. I think Trump really struggles with being more ego than ideology. And I think it reflects a longer term trend that we've documented for many episodes, which are soon going to be back on YouTube, which is that the Trump administration often struggles to find direction, even though they have this very strong figurehead. He's a very fickle guy, and he's not very consistent ideologically. And also, when they came out of the gate swinging with a lot of these old laws kept on the books for various reasons and that Congress wouldn't check them, they are getting stymied. And it's very incredible to see because you're not seeing sort of the Democratic opposition throwing up spikes against them or sort of widespread noncompliance. You're seeing a very much a hesitation to challenge the courts and to break certain norms. I mean, they've broken a ton of norms. We'll talk about the theft of our data and what Doge was really about. It turns out it was not enough billions going to trans people to cut the budget, but dumb things did happen that is not being covered, and that's really annoying because there's a lot of personal data that's being compromised. It's been handed over by the courts in some senses. Actually, and there's one thing I do want to follow up on from the social media little debates they had, which is interesting because one, Elon Musk has access to Twitter and he's used Twitter, well, X, I suppose, to provide a lot of support for Trump, and he's an incredibly rich person. But interestingly, one of the things he threw at Trump was that Trump had been was apparently in the Epstein files, which I think was well known considering Trump's excellent relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. But that while both of those messages were taken down, interestingly, if I was Trump, I think I would immediately sue for libel because that is a very serious, like, slanderous language that was being used.
Yeah.
But we'll see if that happens. But if it was true, I probably wouldn't sue because I wouldn't want any of the discovery happening. But it's just something to keep in mind, I suppose. And it seems like you said, that they both want to de-escalate. And there was, I think, last week a chance of them sort of parting ways and walking away, but it seems like it's blown up. And it'll be curious to learn why.
Yeah, big egos bruise easily, I guess.
And so do big beautiful bills.
Yes, I would like to do our weekly checkup on the bill because that's seems to be what this is. It seems to be what I've been doing for a while now.
And it's also what might call the inciting incident in this Elon Musk Trump relationship. And if you're new here, one of the things we like to do is we don't just like to check out the headlines, we like to keep track of these long-term trends. So we've been covering a lot of this stuff day in, day out, because the Trump administration gets away with so much stuff by just throwing a hand grenade in there and then walking away. But we sort of try to keep it on level, see what's actually happening, and see what happens once the spotlight's moved on. Because that's where we're all left behind to pick up the pieces. And I think in a lot of ways we're doing a lot better in picking up the pieces.
Yeah, and right now the Senate is trying to pick up the pieces, or rather, they are trying to sort out all of the differences between the different Republican factions in the Senate.
Yeah, and that would be the fiscal. So you have the fiscal liberals and the fiscal conservatives. There's people trying to save money and people trying to avoid major cuts. Like what are the key contentions here, and what's on the table?
Well, the moderates in the Senate are a lot like the moderates in the House. They're trying to stop Medicaid and SNAP from getting cut too much and are very concerned about the fact that there is a provision in the bill stop that would stop states from regulating AI at all for like 10 years. So very, very understandable stuff. And on the other hand, the fiscal hawks want more deficit reduction, even if it means cutting Medicaid and SNAP.
Yeah, but
So
do they want that even if it means less tax cuts? That's what I mean about fiscal hawks. There'll be fiscal hawks for cutting all the stuff that we need, like Medicaid and Medicare, but they're not fiscal hawks when it comes to like keeping taxes at the reasonable rate
yeah,
for the rich.
they were going after what are they called? The SALT taxes. That was pretty much the only thing they were going after tax wise.
Hey man, they got rid of tax on tips. That'll only for cash tips though, so that'll be like 2% of the workforce.
Yeah,
But
and
hey,
the crazy thing is the Senate wants to get the bill approved by July 4th for the holiday. Donald wants a show to be showy and all, but that's that's a pretty that's a pretty hard job to do, and I really don't envy the senators. They're in a tough situation, and Trump and the rest of the party are telling them to hurry and to get the bill approved. But this bill is a total mess. Like, how are these different factions in the Republican side of the aisle supposed to reach a consensus on this thing? And how can they make the bill work? I'm not sure they can do both, really.
it's an incredible bill. It's been very contentious. I mean, and like there's insane stuff, and this is like a more than 1,000 page bill, which is an insane amount. So it's have like everything in it. So it's kind of like a show of force in that way. There's stuff like removing a lot of sort of security around the purchasing of gun suppressed silencers and suppressors is that's kind of irrelevant, which has been around since like the days of Al Capone in the 1930s. And I'm like, who was not willing to sign? And this was a provision that was added on. So I'm like wondering who was on the fence about signing into the bill. And we're like, yes, but if you remove tracking for suppressors and remove the extra fee for the suppressors, I'll come on. And it's an incredible bill, and they have an incredibly short timeline. You can't help but see this more as a very serious attempt to strong arm legislature. And it does show some awareness of the necessity of they can't just do everything by executive order. And again, a lot of these executive orders can just be rolled back. And a lot of the departments that were dissolved supposedly still need to complete their functions because there's been no replacements for that. So it's a real mess, and there's no way this thing passes without us getting into massive debt. Because yeah, if you cut all of Medicaid and Medicare, we might be able to afford these tax cuts and these spending increases. But other than that, you're either gonna have to go into one of the ways is you're either gonna have to go into Medicaid and Medicare, or you're gonna have to go into the defense budget. It's the only
Yeah.
way. And this does not need to be this complicated. Like, you can tighten fiscal spending, you can do stuff that actually reduces debt, you can do stuff that doesn't reduce tax income, doesn't reduce income by tax. You can also just not do tax cuts, apparently. Um, so
Yeah, I don't know if
it's
the Republicans have heard that one.
why bother, dude? Why bother? But I think some of these cuts, but I think Doge has had an effect beyond the cuts, which I really think we should talk about, because this has gone completely under the radar. It was a big deal when the Doge was the main item, but now that Musk is sort of slipping under the table, and I should say Musk is going to be so back so soon. He's the kind of guy where I suspect part of this was he thought everyone liked him before like 2016, then everyone hated him after sort of like 2020. And then he's gotten more and more unpopular. And then he was in with MAGA, and then MAGA loved him. And then he had a falling out with MAGA, and now MAGA hates him. And it's kind of like he's back to no one likes him anymore. And I think that's part of the reason why he's lashing out here.
Yeah. He likes when people think of him as the cool technocrat or whatever, the person that's getting space travel back on track or whatnot. But in reality, he's actually just kind of a deadbeat dad.
He really is, dude. He's the kind of guy who, I'm sure he's a genius, but we can also confirm, based on like legally binding documents, that he said that his kids must want to spend more time with him, and what his ex-wife must be as a fool to divorce him in his proxy account. Like, that's the level of guy we're dealing with on his social media platform.
Oh
But
boy.
yeah, let's talk about our data and what the Supreme Court has done to our data, with Doge's access
Yes.
to our data.
On Friday, the Supreme Court made two emergency rulings pretty much back to back, and they were both on different cases that involved Doge. The first one was a federal court order restriction that stopped Doge from accessing Social Security records unless the specific Doge agents were trained in how to use the Social Security database. But the Supreme Court lifted that, so now Doge can access it as much as they want with whoever they want. And the second one was another federal court order that gave the watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics access to Doge's records as a way of sort
Keeping
of
them accountable.
keeping them accountable, bridging the gap on the Freedom of Information Act, which is supposed to keep agencies accountable, even
Because
though
eventually we see their stuff.
even though Doge is kind of in a gray area where it's not certain if they're an agency or just an advisory department.
Whatever is convenient is how basically everything organizationally works in politics.
And yeah, so the Democrat appointed justices, the ones we view as like more liberal justices, obviously dissented and said this is bad. And I have to agree, this is pretty distressing in my view. The Supreme Court gave Doge the green light essentially to violate the privacy of US citizens while only being accountable to the president in
Because
fact.
the real crucial problem with the US government at this point in time was that it wasn't accountable. It was too accountable to the people. That's the one thing they needed to rein in. It was just too accountable to the people. And one of the things that bothers me about Doge is there is some good impulses, like trying to get a lot of these old systems, like the coding languages, the IRS, like the coding languages a lot of the government uses is like COBOL, which is so old. I don't even think it's hard for me to imagine how you even get people to fix the code on that stuff. So there's some real impulse, but there's just it's just not being executed in any reasonable way. And that's one of the things that stands out to me a lot about the sort of the Trump success, is that he's very good at communicating these complicated things in a very simple way. But there's just not simple solutions to this. And if there is one, the solution is probably not destroy everything.
Yeah. And of course, this is not to say that our privacy wasn't already being violated by the government, but we're at risk of losing some of the scraps of privacy that we still have left because, I mean, Social Security, their database is meant to be kept pretty tightly locked up, and you can't just come in and access it for no reason. They have a very strict policy of making sure that US citizens will have their privacy respected in regards to all this really sensitive information that the agency has to handle. But now, like,
Yeah.
these 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds from Doge can just come in and do whatever they want with it. Access your grandma's social security records.
And some of your therapy records and all sorts of the stuff that
Hmm.
we're very cautious about. And if they find stuff and they do stuff, it'll be very difficult to ever see what they actually did. And that's a consistent thing the Trump administration does, which is if they really think they're doing good, then why do they keep scrubbing the books behind them? Pete Hegseth's messages, all these messages on Signal get deleted. Lots of stuff isn't going to be going to the National Archives. These people are not going to be able to be discovered by by accountability agencies, accountability organizations. It's just like, I think this is something we see a lot throughout the Trump administration, which is, and this is really important for the case of Abrigo Garcia, who might be coming back, which is this fundamental, just trust me, I'm going to make this work. And we joked about the great leap forward mentality, but I think that's very true. Even when Trump came in, he said, I need people who will support me, people who won't say no to me. And that was true. He'd call like them his generals when he was in the first term. He'd say, these are my generals. And he really wants that personal loyalty and that personal faith. And I think shockingly, there's too many Americans still grounded in reality for, I think, a lot of that to work. And we are seeing the tariffs roll in. And even Elon Musk admitted that these tariffs are probably going to put us into a recession by the end of this term. By the end of this year, basically.
Let's get more into detail on Garcia, because I'm very interested. I didn't read a whole lot about his return or the pretty grievous allegations being said against him by the president pretty much immediately.
Yeah, so some background here. Abrigo Garcia was a 29-year-old El Salvadoran immigrant who was brought to the United States. He's a worker. He has a family here. He's been living here for almost half his life. And the main reason why he was here, he was let in 2019 because he was at risk of being basically harmed by gangs within El Salvador. He was deported in March. And so the administration has been ordered to have him returned. In fact, he was actually ordered for him not to be deported, but he was still deported anyways. So the important thing here is this indictment was filed on May 21st, and now he's going to be returned to the United States. So there's a big question where they said, no, we can't return Abrigo Garcia because it's a foreign policy thing. Judges can't do this, whatever. What they were able to do is to get an arrest warrant to return him from the Supermax prison he was in. And, well, actually, they moved him out of the Supermax prison to a much nicer prison so he wouldn't be as sensitive looking, I imagine. And then their main accusation is basically that he was a member of this very violent gang, MS-13, and that this case that he's being tried for is completely irrelevant to his deportations. It's all about if he's a criminal or not. And the incredible thing is, which is one, this could kind of make sense when you follow the chain of events, but it only really makes sense in reverse. Because thinking about the way this started is, the Trump administration lets Abrigo Garcia in 2019. Then, Trump administration deports Abrigo Garcia. Then the Trump administration says, and they did say this, like, don't let them gaslight you that it was an accident to deport him. They didn't mean to deport him. And then they say, we're not taking him back. In fact, he's actually a criminal. And then once they're ordered to return him, they say, we're gonna indict him then. And then at any point during this process, if they had evidence that he was a criminal, you think they would have revealed it. And in fact, when they were asked to reveal evidence of him being a criminal, they said it was a threat to national security. The one thing I'd say is that baffles me is I'm not quite sure what they're doing with this, and I wonder if even they are.
Yeah, it seems more to me like they're making these very panicked post-truth sort of statements where they just try to wriggle their way out of whatever hole they've dropped themselves into at the moment. There isn't a unified narrative. It's more just whatever sounds good at the time, whatever excuse sounds good for whatever they've bungled this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that a lot with tariffs, and part of me wonders if Howard Lutnick wasn't relieved when the tariffs first got blocked, because that would be his out for the disaster that happened. They could say that they didn't have a choice. Yeah, I wonder about that. And like you see a lot of mixed messaging. Like Kash Patel was on Joe Rogan recently, where he said that there's no video from Jeffrey Epstein's island, which is, I think, 2 days after Pam Bondi explicitly said that the FBI had hundreds of hours of footage from Jeffrey Epstein's island. And it's also, I want to mention, it is incredible how much we still have to talk about Jeffrey Epstein. Because, like, you think you'd either just settle it or you'd move on. And it's just incredible how prolific it is.
Yeah, you'd think that that the existence of a possibly global network of pedophile sex traffickers involved in very who are involved in with and embedded in very high social circles. Like you think if the implication of that being a thing would get governments to be a little bit more vigorous in pursuing those
Well,
criminals.
more than that, I would think the guys who said release the Epstein file, Jeffrey Epstein was murdered, all of that would be opposed to the fact the president was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, is probably in the
Yeah.
Epstein files. You just think, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you think there'd be a more unified front against these traffickers, but it's more just being used as another political gotcha tool instead of,
Well, it's also, you're not talking about like widespread corruption within the government or the lack of accountability among the elite or the slow dilution of sort of the equality under the law. You're talking about this funny story, this entertaining story about this wacky, like fantastical, almost true crime level narrative. And it lacks so much substance, but it's so dynamic. And I think that's I think it's something that's really spread a lot more since because of social media. We should probably wrap up and just talk a little bit about the recent maneuvers around trade.
yeah, fill me in on that. I haven't been I haven't been paying attention to trading because I've only seen the prices go up.
You've only seen prices go up. Yeah, I've seen some of those. They're adding an extra zero to things. That's gonna add up pretty quickly. I'll tell you what. But actually, just before we do that, I do want to say that this Abrigo Garcia thing was not just about Trump. The Supreme Court had to demand that it would be facilitated, that his return would be facilitated. The district judge, Senius, had to probe to see if the administration had actually complied with the requirement to return Abrigo Garcia. And the senator had to go down to find this American immigrant and confirm that he had his rights and that people should stand up for his rights. But anyways, we talk about the trade deals, which actually, I think the Trump administration has flux between 200 countries, 90 countries, 70 countries, 20 countries, however many countries they're supposed to have made deals with. They've made deals with about none. So the quote-unquote China deal, we've talked about how BS that is. China still holds the cards in terms of they don't have as high tariffs anymore, and they still have restrictions on rare earth metals, so you're not going to be making fighter jets or cell phones without that. There's still really no substitute for a lot of those electronic devices and all of that. And the Trump administration has actually even highlighted the fact that they might be interested in not producing all of the Vietnamese shirts. They might want to just focus on high-tech stuff like computer chips, some sort of
Oh my
chips
gosh,
act.
they're catching
Yeah,
up. They're
they're catching. Yeah, they'll be maybe they'll be in 2021 by the end of this year.
Yeah, developed economies.
Developed economy. Yeah, but all of those countries supposedly, which they didn't name any of them, which sure, and they went on Twitter be like, if you guys don't sign up first, you'll have a worse deal. And it's just so obvious they don't have the leverage. And even like center right media is pointing out the fact that it's very hard for them to make a deal. And this whole Trump Xi Jinping sort of phone call and meeting, I don't think indicates that they're any not less desperate, but I mean they're any more. There's been no deals. I think we have 20-ish more days before the Liberation Day tariffs would come back into effect.
Oh boy.
And there's no deals. Because remember also, if you've seen the one quote unquote real deal that's been made, not like a memorandum, it was the one where Trump just called Keir Starmer in the middle of the night and was like, we're going to do a deal this week. And Keir Starmer was like, cool, so cheaper cars and booze. And Trump was like, yes, do it. But the UK still got hit by the new metals tariff on aluminum and steel. So they were not spared from that. And the Japanese, one of our close allies and key industrial partner, has stated on multiple times that they're really uncertain what the point of their negotiating is. Because sometimes Trump opens negotiations with like, well, you got to stop dropping bowling balls on the cars we import to check their quality and all of that, which isn't true. So he's just like bringing up like 1980s slander about Japanese production, but also a very insightful incident where at one point 3 cabinet officials put the talks to the Japanese on hold and began debating in front of them about what they were trying to get out of the Japanese.
Sounds like they didn't have a memo. They were just
Yeah, most of them not have gotten invited to that Signal chat.
no. It sounds like each of them had an idea of what the plan was, but
Concept of a
a
plan.
concept of a plan. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think that's the thing that really holds true. If there's one Trump promise that's I think held up from the campaign, it's that he definitely has a concept of a plan. And I think that's the thing I want to close out on for this week, which has been a very convoluted week, which is that I think you're seeing a lot more chaos in Trump land. And I don't think this is what they wanted. And they tried to come in strong, and there's just a lot of uncertainty. And I do think Trump might be jockeying to really challenge the courts. And if that does come, it will be a real challenge, and you'll really want to hope the Democrats and civil society and all of us are doing our part. And there's still people in San Diego protesting, by the way, like going to the ICE headquarters and demanding that they get a lot of their family members back. And we have seen like a U.S. Marshal get arrested for basically no reason. Future Isaac here. This episode was recorded on Saturday before the protests escalated and before Donald Trump sent in the National Guard without Governor Gavin Newsom's approval, and various other things have changed since then. I'm just including this bit in here to explain that because I was at a conference when this was prepared earlier.
and I know that our schedule has been pretty wonky lately, but we are working to get that back on track. So please like and subscribe to the new channel. Make sure that you'll be notified for when new episodes come out.
And we are going to cover this in full next week, hopefully because there'll be a lot more details now because there's a lot of like media construction about how small these protests are versus what the actual approvals of the military being deployed actually are. So it'll be really good to get into all of that stuff, but it's just not going to come out now. Just worth noting. Nevertheless, there's definitely a storm brewing in the United States, and we'll be here to cover all of it. And I think that brings us to an end for today, and we will see you all later. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because we're on a new channel, so we sort of lost all the progress we made, but, it's just going to get better and better.
Yeah, check out our Instagram. So follow us there and make sure that you'll be informed if our channel gets nuked yet again.